Hello, and welcome to this edition of People in Transition. I'm your host, Bob Gerst. I've been hiring, firing, and mentoring executives, frontline employees, interns, and job seekers in companies around the world through a host of transitions, some difficult, but most very good. I work with people in Hong Kong, India, Australia, and across the United States. What sets them apart? A lot, but there's more they have in common. And one of those commonalities is transition is a part of life. This experience has given me a bird's eye view on a variety of trends, economies, industry disruptors, and transitions that are big and small. It also brought me into contact with the thought leaders and decision makers you need to meet, the people who can make the difference that matters to you right now. Imagine knowing exactly what to do next and how to know it's time to make your big change. The insight track you're going to access during our future episodes is better than a crystal ball. It's the exact information you need to take that next step. Whether you're a new grad applying for your first professional job, someone looking to transition your work experience into a promotion, launching your own company, or maybe even starting to plan your retirement, you're in transition, and this series is for you. We all know transition can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. And it's even fun when you have VIP access to the future you want. Are you tired of the uncertainty of being passed up? We'll share with you the tools and skills that can take your dreams to the front of the line. So, if change is on your horizon, or maybe just the thought of change, you won't want to miss this discussion. It could be the exact edge you need to turn transition into an amazing opportunity. Hello, everyone listening to this episode of People in Transition. In this episode, we're going to go a little different direction than some of our earlier recordings. We are going to discuss franchise and owning one as an option available to you. I can think of no one more qualified to discuss franchise options than Diane Pleuss. Diane, thank you for being with us today.
I'm honored to be here, Bob, and looking forward to our conversation.
Diane, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got into the franchise world?
Very happy to. I used a relocation to make a career pivot. I had been in advertising, was a radio station sales manager, got my MBA while working full time. And my husband got a job in California. So we decided to move west. We'd been in the Midwest, and I could have transferred with my company, but decided to use those transferable skills that I had built up and put it to use in a new industry. And that happened to be franchising because that was the first ad that I answered. It was for a marketing director for a franchise organization. So that's how I started, and was then parlayed that position to become marketing director for a franchise company. Did that for several years until, as frequently happens with some of the people that listen to your podcast that are in career transition, I found myself in career transition as I was downsized. I was very surprised because I was part of senior management, and yet, hopefully, as many of the people, again, that are listening, there was a silver lining to that. I learned about franchise consulting opportunities as an independent consultant under their umbrella. Two of the men that I had worked with had been invited to join franchise, and I talked to them and was also invited. That was 17 years ago, and it turned out to be probably the best move that I ever made. So I very much like helping people, working with them, showing them opportunities, and it's been just a great option for me.
Diane, help us understand, what is the difference between buying a franchise versus starting your own business?
Well, there are both similarities and differences. Certainly with a franchise, you still have to do the work. You can't sit on the couch and eat bonbons and expect the business to run on total autopilot. So you still have to do the work, much like an independent business. But with a franchise, you're getting the systems, the infrastructure, everything is laid out for you. You might say you're getting the recipe of how to put things together. You're getting the training, the support. Others have gone before you. They say, do this, don't do that, and learn from our mistakes. And we fine-tune that and we've tweaked this. So you should be able to get off to a much better start, a much faster start. Many times people may not have that big idea. So they want to be a business owner and have more control and more flexibility, but do they have something that is going to be viable amongst all the competition? And with a franchise, they can look at how people have done, and it's pretty transparent. So it really helps to minimize the risk.
What type of franchise options are available?
There are many more options than most people can even think of. Certainly, we're always aware of fast food restaurants because there are so many of them and they're by the side of the road, the flashing signs, and yet there's many additional options. If we look at things that are location-based or brick and mortar, we might look at fitness studios, hair salons, massage studios, nail salons, laundromats, staffing businesses, to name a couple there. There's a lot in the service-based business, so that could be exciting things like emergency services, water, fire, or mold damage. It could be a lot of things related to homeowners, which are doing especially well now during these pandemic times because they're essential services. So if we look at the house and we just start at the top, there are franchises for roofing, for gutters, for insulation, irrigation, lawn care, pool care, pet care, window coverings, flooring, handyman, plumbing, electrical, HVAC are some that come to mind in that category. And then there's automotive aftermarket, there's education, there's some entertainment. There's really just so many different options. If you think of an independent business, just about any independent business will usually have a corresponding franchise for consideration.
And Diane, how would I know if franchise option is right for me?
Well, I would suggest, Bob, that you do a self-assessment first, that you look at your work habits, your work ethic. Are you a person that takes initiative? Are you comfortable following a system? And yet, are you that take charge person who is comfortable hiring people, training, and all that goes with it? Do you like to build relationships? Do you like to be involved in the community? Those would be some indicators that a franchise might be a good option. I certainly encourage people to learn about the business. And one thing that's really helpful is to talk to existing franchise owners. So I will share that when I first got into franchising, I thought anyone who was a franchisee, a business owner, I thought they were Superman or Superwoman. And then I started chatting with them and I realized they are no different than you or me. They just took action and said, we can do this, and they had that self-confidence to go ahead. So many times it helps to talk to the existing owners and learn about how they're running the business and the challenges that they had, the successes they had. And if they sound someone like you, it might be a good option for you. And if they sound like they're doing things that you could never do, well, then maybe it's not a good option.
Diane, who is an ideal candidate for a franchise? And then kind of a follow-up question to that is, what does it take from that ideal candidate for them to be successful at owning the franchise?
I think some of the things that I just mentioned as far as that ideal candidate, first of all, I would ask that they have an open mind to look at additional options. Many times we limit ourselves and we think, oh, there's just fast food, and do I want to do that? Because it's usually a higher investment. The hours can be staggering, a lot of employees. So as I mentioned, there are other options. So if the person can say, I could look at some of these. I hadn't thought of any of the ones that might be service-based that are under the radar. They usually have lower investment, usually nice margins, and can get started sooner. So initially, I'll ask that we set aside any preconceived notions to evaluate the business and look at it from a business owner standpoint. What would the day in the life look like? And do you have the skills for that? Would you enjoy that? Those would be, I think, some of the attributes of an ideal candidate. Certainly hardworking, receptive to learning, wanting to be involved in the community, comfortable hiring, managing employees. Not every franchise business has employees, but most do. So those are some things that come to mind right away.
And Diane, let's do the flip side of that coin. Who would you coach to not be a franchise owner? Because I'm sure that you've had to tell some that you're a great guy, Bob, but this just isn't right for you.
You are absolutely right. And if we are not doing that, we would probably be doing a disservice to some folks. So first of all, they do have to have some financial qualifications. A franchise or any business that a person would start does usually require a certain level of liquidity and net worth to ensure that the person is going to be successful. And they also have to have family support. If we look at a spectrum of 1 to 10, and if 1 is the person that needs that guaranteed paycheck, they would be too stressed out. They would not be appropriate to own a franchise business, and a franchise company should not award them that business. And I do say award rather than sell, because good companies, it is an awarding process. On the other end of that spectrum, someone who's a 10, maybe they're that Renaissance person and they're great at so many different things and they like to do it all. They could write the training manuals, they could handle the advertising, they're comfortable hiring, training, creating all of those things, the logo, all of that. I might think of someone like a Lady Gaga who could show up in training wearing her meat dress. And that person probably would not be a good match for a franchise. They may be too independent and they could feel constrained. So the people who usually do well fall in that 3 to 7 category. Again, recognizing that they're bringing skills to the table and that a franchise doesn't eliminate risk, but it is a risk reduction strategy.
I'll let you tell Lady Gaga that she doesn't get to be a franchise owner.
Well, and there are many celebrities that own fast food franchises. So yes, I better be careful in what I say.
Diane, I call you up. I say, I'm interested in owning a franchise. Walk me through what happens then. Who do I talk with? What are the things you ask me about until we get to that point that we make the decision to either go forward or not? And kind of how much time are we talking about in that process?
And it is a process, as you just mentioned, and it works well because franchising is process oriented. So I will first ask you to complete a short 4-page questionnaire that is online. It usually takes people 15 to 20 minutes to complete it. When you've done that, then we would schedule a consultation call where we would talk in depth. That call usually lasts an hour and a half to 2 hours. And we talk about your goals for the business, what you want to accomplish. We talk about your skills. We'll talk about territory, sales and marketing, employees. Do you want a single unit or territory, or do you want to be that empire builder and have 10 units or maybe even 100? We'll talk about investment levels. We'll talk about industries so that I hopefully have a pretty good picture of where you want to go and how we could get you there. So after that, I will write that information up in what we call your franchise business model, which summarizes it. And that's what I'll look to use when I look for companies for you. So I will come back and introduce several companies that are both available and viable in your area. And then we get to the exciting part where I make the introduction to the franchise companies. So you would be talking directly with the franchise companies and learning the details and all the specifics from each franchise development rep. Usually those calls are about an hour long. Many times there are webinars. Most of the time they will say at the end of the call, "So Bob, what do you think? Do you want to learn more?" And if you want to learn more, they will continue. And if not, they will usually wish you well. During that time, we will also have calls where I'll be sharing information with you on general things so that you've got that overview of what the legal document, the franchise disclosure document, looks like. We might talk about funding. I might introduce you to a funding source so you can understand options for you there. And basically, this is a process of elimination. So ideally, I like to introduce 3 companies. And one company might be a lower investment, one might be a mid-range, and one might be a stretch investment so that you can learn what that looks like. One could be a service-based business, one could be a location-based business, one could be few employees, one could be opportunity for many employees. So I try to look for companies whose culture I think would match you and where you could be successful and happy. So it's important that I not only know you, but I know the franchise companies as well. And then it's a process of elimination. If you start with the 3 companies and you have a couple calls with all of them, at some point in time, you'll say, "You know, Diane, this one company is good, but it's not as good as the other ones you presented, and I'm really pressed for time. Let's put this one on the back burner and let's focus on the others." And then we'll continue through the process. You'll go through a review of that legal document, and then you'll have the opportunity to talk to franchisees, what we call validation. After that, most companies have what they call a discovery day or a confirmation day or a meet the team day, where you could go to the home office and meet the staff or do it virtually. That's usually the last step in the process. And then after that, it's appropriate to make a decision, yes or no. But you've had this whole time to learn, to listen, to ask questions, to kind of try it on, if you will. And really, there shouldn't be any big questions. You should have had the opportunity to have asked them all, review it, and then to make a decision. So that's the process, which usually takes approximately 6 to 8 weeks to get everything in order. It certainly can be less. Legally, it can't be any shorter than 2 weeks. And certainly I've had people that have taken longer. Sometimes they're waiting for a year-end bonus. Sometimes they're waiting for a major event, maybe a son or daughter getting married or whatever the case is. So again, I try to look at it from a timing standpoint that's going to work with them. Sometimes people are moving. I mean, life happens in there too.
Is there a difference between a more established franchise and a new or emerging franchise?
Well, as you would expect, there are pros and cons with each. So with the more established, we usually are more familiar with the brand. There's a certain comfort level that comes with that, and yet it may not be available in our area. So the good locations may already be sold out, or the investment may have increased. So we want to consider those things. With a newer emerging brand, it doesn't have that brand name recognition yet, so you may have to spend a little more on advertising or allow more time for it to be known in that market segment. However, territory may be available. You may have the first pick or be able to get home turf which most people like. Sometimes when I work with execs, they want to have more of a voice, and they like those early stage franchise companies because they feel they can have maybe a little more impact and influence, and they appreciate that. So again, there isn't a right or a wrong, but as we chat, some people will say, gee, I'm leaning towards this because I want everything very buttoned down. I'm not very risk tolerant, so let's go for something that is well established and has all of that in place. And the next person might say, gee, something that's newer is exciting, and I see the opportunity, and I'd like to be that early adopter and go for it and grab it. So again, those are things we'll discuss.
And Diane, how could I prepare myself better for a franchise role? Are there things I should learn, things that I should experience, things that I should talk with someone about that would help me make that transition into a franchise role?
With that, surprisingly, most franchise companies do not want you to have industry experience. So if we look at a massage studio, for example, they do not want you to go to massage school to learn how to do that. They, again, want you to be able to hire people that will fulfill that so that you can manage them, or likewise a handyman business. They don't want you to pull up all kinds of YouTube videos and learn how to do different common tasks in that area. So it never hurts to brush up on accounting or things like that. But most of the time, the franchise company will want to teach you about their company and the industry and their style and their method. So I don't know that there's any particular courses. I do probably recommend reading some motivational books because there's always fear in the unknown. And whenever we make a change, we tend to think that a job has security, but it's really perceived security. Or sometimes I like to think of the insecurity of a supposedly secure job because it isn't. So again, you're looking at yourself, and I think you need to stay focused on your goals and what you want to achieve. Spend time in that regard.
What do I actually get when I buy a franchise? What comes with my money?
Well, you have the keys to the kingdom, if you will. You have access to the brand, to the training, to the vendor relationships, to the advertising and marketing. And one thing that you have access to that most people forget about is you have all these other franchisees that you're now a member of. You're part of that family. So many times a franchisee can call corporate to get an answer. Or sometimes they say, well, I'm just going to call Joe because Joe and I went to training and we're buds, and I'm sure that he knows, and I don't want to, maybe bother corporate or whatever. I want to talk to Joe just to see what's going on. So there is this network of franchisees that understand where you're coming from. When you have a tough day, you can commiserate with them. When you have successes, you can call and they understand and they can celebrate with you. To me, one of the very nice things is when you succeed, it helps everyone. So all boats can rise and you can celebrate everyone's success. It doesn't come at the detriment of someone else.
What kind of money does it take to be successful in a franchise? I'm sure that there's a range that you coach your people on. What would that range be?
Basically, we're looking at a couple of things. We're looking at liquidity and net worth. So franchise fees can range quite a bit. They could be as low as, for example, $15,000, and they could also be in the six-digit area. The majority of franchise fees, which are the one-time payment, generally range between $50,000 to $70,000, and most franchise agreements are approximately 10 years. So it's that one-time fee. In addition to that, you're going to need capital to go to training, and that could include flight, hotels, food while you're at training, and getting the business started. Now, that might include a new phone, a new laptop, maybe a vehicle, maybe equipment, certainly advertising and marketing. Franchise companies are required to list expenses for a minimum of the first 3 months in that legal document. Many times they'll have a range, and sometimes that range will depend upon the city, the circumstances. So we generally expect major cities to cost more because of advertising or build out. So you're going to look at that and you're going to say, I live here and we're at the top end or we're in the mid range. And again, when you talk with franchisees, you can also ask them about investment levels and glean some tidbits from them as well. So if we look at an average franchise fee of, let's say, $50,000, and you want to have working capital of, let's say, $25,000, we're probably starting with a $75,000 amount to get started in a franchise. And usually most companies want you to have a net worth of at least $100,000. Keep in mind that if anyone should fail, it's terrible for them, but it's also a mark against the franchise company because they have to disclose that. So if you're looking at a franchise company and you see all of these closures, and maybe they just had a big heart and said, oh, we could award you a franchise even though we don't think you're quite financially qualified, but then we have a bump in the road like COVID, and they just want to make sure that you're adequately capitalized before they award you a franchise. And certainly if we're looking at anything that's brick and mortar, usually the rule of thumb we look at there is to have about 100,000 liquid and a 300,000 net worth as basic rules of thumb.
Diane, what does know your risk tolerance, what does that mean as it relates to owning a franchise?
I think that means that you're not investing more than a certain percentage of your net worth, that if it were to be the worst case scenario, could you recover from that? Do you have the wherewithal to start another business or get a job? Do you have a spouse who's employed? What we don't want is anyone to be living in a cardboard box under the freeway. We look at that and we say, let's make sure that we're looking at franchise investments that are appropriate. For example, I can think of one couple that I worked with, and they were not well capitalized, so I presented service-based options to them because of the lower investment. And they did the investigation, and they looked at them, and they said, these are good franchises, but we really want something that is location-based and brick and mortar, and we have a high tolerance for risk. And the wife was working and she actually had the better job. The husband was going to start the business, and they said, this is what we can do. And so then we looked at companies that had the higher investment, and they did move forward and they were successful. And I was a little bit nervous, but that's the approach that we took. And sometimes I use the analogy of buying a house. Most people don't buy their dream house to start. Most people invest in a house and they let it appreciate it. They help to fix it up. And then they may say, okay, we could now move to a bigger house or a house in another school district, because they now have more equity and they can look at more options. So sometimes we'll take that very practical approach and we'll look at businesses that they can afford and be successful in. One time I worked with a man who came to me and he had just sold his franchise and he wanted to buy another one. And I said, so why did you buy this one? And he said, well, it was the only one I could afford. But he said, I knew I wanted to work for myself. I knew I wanted my hard work and effort to come back and benefit me. And I wanted to get started. So I got started. I built it up. I sold it at a nice profit. And I'm ready for the next one.
Diane, you've been doing franchise consulting for almost 20 years.
Yes.
Has there ever been a good or a bad time in the marketplace to own a franchise?
I do think that now is a particularly good time to look at it for a number of reasons. One, capital is available. So people that need to borrow money, the rates are low, and the SBA is busy. In fact, one of the downsides is they chuckle that the S in SBA, while it stands for Small Business Association, it also stands right now for slow because so many people are looking at taking loans to start businesses. So money is readily available. The stock market is strong. Housing has appreciated. So people might look at doing a home equity line of credit. Many times people will fund a business by using retirement funds, which when you roll it into your own business, there are no penalties and there are actually some tax advantages. It's not something that a person can do on their own. There are companies that specialize in that. But from the last downturn, I can recall talking with people, and when we had that major correction, some of my candidates said, "Oh my gosh, why didn't I go ahead? The amount of money that I lost was equal to the franchise fee, and I could have been in business. I could have had more control." And they look at it now and say, "I don't know how long it's going to continue. It's done well. I would like to pull out some of my increases and invest them in a business where I've got more control and know what's going on." I think there's pent-up demand. And again, people want to support local businesses. So I think there is just a lot of opportunity available right now.
Diane, what are the 3 things you wish every franchise owner would know before they buy that franchise?
They will still have to work. Just because they join a gym doesn't mean that they're going to be buff. They have to go there and they have to work out and they have to put in some sweat and some time. And even what we call manager-run businesses, it's not like investing in a stock. It's not on autopilot. They will still have to oversee the operation. So they still have to be involved. Some businesses require more involvement than others, but they do have to invest time and energy in the business. I would encourage them to do a full investigation and to look at it from where they're going to be the most successful, to leverage their skills and where do they want to go. Sometimes people buy a business because they want to make a lot of money. They're looking at that financial return. Other times people are more interested in the lifestyle and they want to be able to coach their kids' little league or have that kind of flexibility to volunteer to be the parent that goes on field trips. Sometimes people say, "I want to build generational wealth. I want to build a business that I could hand down," or they want to work with a partner, or they want to provide opportunity for kids. Sometimes people have bought businesses because they want to contribute to a cause, to a charity, to a church. So all of those things are really important to understand their why. Why are they doing this? And then will that business get them to where they want to go? I think that's critical. So those are a couple things that come to mind right away.
Diane, thank you so much for all your thoughts about franchise as an option for someone who's either now or in the future in transition. You really gave a great roadmap. Any last comments that you'd like to make?
I will just encourage people to keep their options open. Many times when I work with people who are in career transition, I chuckle and I say, "You're probably going to be getting a job offer because now you know that you could do something else and you could be successful. Your confidence is going to come back and hopefully you might be in that enviable position of looking at a job and looking at a business, and may the best opportunity be the one that you select."
Diane, thank you for helping each of us dream big about our future. I'm glad you were on today's episode of People in Transition.
Well, thank you very much. I do hope it's helpful for the people in transition to give them another window or door to explore. And if it's not right, and sometimes it's not, and I'm always very kind, or people self-select out, and that's perfectly fine as well.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. We're working in unprecedented times as the world responds to the recent COVID-19 crisis. The fact is that even those who are not in transition understand it could be right around the corner, next month, or a year from now. The purpose of these episodes are to give listeners support and the critical tools to adjust with the winds, wherever they come. I'll continue to introduce you to guests who have successfully, perhaps gracefully, or without too many battle scars, survived their own obstacle courses, and can share useful information on how to steady your ship or your world in this uncertainty. If today's message was helpful to you, please share it on social media. If you have any questions or podcast ideas for future conversations, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I appreciate your time you're investing in sharing these important conversations with me, my guests, and others who are going through life transition. Transitions between jobs, life stages, new entrepreneurial ventures, or whatever life brings. Change is constant. The more prepared you are for it, the better and easier the change will occur. Thank you again. This is your host, Bob Gerst. See you at our next episode of People in Transition.